I have been collecting quotes since I was about 9 years old. It started when I would hang out in my parents' office, and they had this little black quote book that had this like really great things in it that I could learn from. So I started carrying it around with me, and then I realized I really just wanted my own, because not everything in here is great. So I remember taking trips and like writing them down and onto my own little notebook. And that eventually turned into like a Word document. And I would print off a little copy that I'd keep in my wall, and then I have this longer document that I would find later. I'd print them off and put them all over my room. It looked really weird. And eventually it turned into, I actually imported them all into Evernote. And to this day, I keep a little notebook in my bag with me at all times that includes my ultimate favorite of about 200. But my total collection is somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 right now, indexed, because I'm a nerd. And I usually avoid referencing them in general because quotes are cliche. Like, we all know that. But this is the exception to that, because there are some things that I cannot say as well as others. And I will pay due diligence to those who have gone before me, so be prepared. Ray Bradbury has what I believe is perhaps one of the most important reminders of why we do what we do and why it's important. We need not to be let alone. We need to be really bothered once in a while. How long is it since you were really bothered about something important, about something real? Well, I'm pretty certain all of you are here today because you are bothered and you want to make a difference. And sometimes it's really hard to make a difference because we're only one person. We're so limited. We look at this world and we see all these big people doing big things, making big differences. So how can we, just one person, do anything? But you are still one person. You still have agency. You still have mobility. You still have a voice. And so while we cannot do everything as a single person, we can do something. Every step we make, every time we raise our voices, we are doing something. And because of that, because we can't do everything, we have an obligation to do what we can, to not refuse to take on these battles. Does anyone know who this is? Rosa Parks. Yay! In case you don't know, this was actually taken December 5th in 1955. She, her story is, I'm sure everybody is familiar with her story, but it's the fallout that most people don't always know. So MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., boycotted the bus company 4 days later. Within a year, the Supreme Court had ruled the segregated seating unconstitutional. One action led to another action that spurred others to do something that later was powerful enough to change the face of the country. She was known as the mother of the civil rights movement, and for largely this reason. But she said later, I had no idea that history was being made. I was just tired of getting up. And for so many people who are marginalized and oppressed and constantly face these battles, standing up isn't always the harder step. In many ways, it's the constant everyday microaggressions that they face. And that just wears at you. And it tears you down and makes you exhausted. And it forces you to give up a little bit every day. And so sometimes becoming an advocate is just saying, I'm tired of that. And when you are, things can happen. Who knows who these are? Yes, in fact, they are the three of the Greensboro Four. They demanded lunch at a white-only counter in 1960. 3 days later, they were joined by 300 students, and by summer, in 50 cities across 9 states. It directly led to the creation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which supported and helped with the freedom rides and voter registration throughout the South, and was in large part responsible for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. 4 people. Franklin McCain, one of those 4, said, inevitably people ask me, what can I do? What kind of question is that? Look around you. We all encounter these instances of oppression and frustration and these little tiny ways that the world eats at us. All you have to do is look, and you have something you can fix. Does anyone know who this is? No, but thank you for trying. I'm not surprised, but this is one of my personal heroes. This is Sophie Scholl and her brother Hans of the White Rose. Sophie and her brother and the rest of the White Rose were convicted, and actually specifically Sophie, was convicted of high treason and was executed by guillotine in 1943. The White Rose was a non-violent, student-led organization devoted to to creating anti-Nazi propaganda against Hitler. The pamphlets were eventually smuggled out of Nazi Germany and were used as Allied propaganda. They were scattered across, dropped by plane, across battlefields. As Lillian Garrett Gogg said, it is possibly the most spectacular moment of resistance that I can think of in the 20th century. The fact that 5 little kids in the mouth of the wolf, where it really counted, had the tremendous courage to do what they did is spectacular to me. I told you I have a lot of quotes. Hers are the only last words that I have. And she said, how can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause? Such a fine sunny day, and I have to go. But what does my death matter if through us thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action? And still, even today, across this country, we have people who are fighting for the rights of others. Penn students help people who are hospitalized on election day to get their votes cast. University of Arkansas just passed fighting for legislation to get menstrual products available to students who right now aren't able to go to school because they can't afford the products that they need. This is a problem, and people are fighting every day to make the world a better place. Now, there are many ways that we can do this, many ways that we can engage. These are 5 general ones. We're going to go through some examples. One-on-one. Does anybody know who this is? This is Daryl Davis. And he is a blues musician and a KKK deconverter. He personally goes around the country and makes friends with members of the KKK. And he collects their robes once they've given them to him, which they do. This began because he was playing one night at a jazz club, and a gentleman walked up to him after, and he was like, I never knew a black man could play jazz so well. He was like, do you know where jazz came from? And he's like, no. So he gave him a little bit of the history, and one of the guys who was standing next to him, he was like, you want to tell him why you don't know this? Turns out he's a card-carrying member of the KKK. They sat down, had a couple drinks together, and just talked about blues and jazz music. And he said in an interview, the fact that a Klansman and a black person could sit down at the same table and enjoy the same music, that was a seed planted. So what do you do when you plant a seed? You nourish it. I decided to go around the country and sit down with Klan leaders and Klan members to find out, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? Social media is another avenue. We can talk about how toxic and poisonous it is, but there are examples of people who make a difference in the lives of others. This is a semi-famous example. Sarah Silverman had been recently attacked on Twitter. Instead of lashing out, instead of talking about how you have all these nice guys who say terrible things about women, she empathized. Her first words, "I believe in you." She went and checked his Twitter feed, had found out that he was suffering from severe back problems. And those pains, those aches, those tiny things that affect our lives can just poison us and can poison our interaction with the world. And so what did she do? She reached out and she's like, "You know what? I choose to love you." And then she used her privilege, she used the resources she had to get him help. And they did. They responded. And somebody was able to get access to medical care that he would not have been able to have otherwise. We can also make a difference in our communities. I would ask you if you know who this is, but it actually says part of them on here, so that's a little cheating. But this is the Loretto Mutter House. They're also known as the Climate Change Warrior Nuns, if you've ever heard of them. They actually are in Kentucky, and I met with them and wanted to take them all home after I met with them. But in 2013, there was going to be a bluegrass pipeline that was going to come right through their land. They were the first convent that had ever been formed in the U.S. And they have been here for so long, and they have deep ties to their land. It's really special to see their relationship with where they are. This pipeline would have destroyed that. So what did they do? They protested. They went to the Capitol. They went door to door. Their protests, they were known as the singing nuns because they would be singing gospel music and at all their protests. They had announced about a year later that they were going to be rerouting that pipeline because of these nuns. And interestingly enough, it actually failed to some degree. So Sister Loretto Cecilia Skies said, when we went to the legislature in Frankfurt to strengthen our eminent domain law, the House of Representatives passed, but it stalled in the Senate. Nevertheless, we changed minds. People heard us. They were able to make enough difference in the minds of the people to make a difference to a billion-dollar oil company. You can also make a difference at the university where you live and where you work and where you research. You might recognize at least one of the gentlemen in this picture, one of these pictures. This is at Mizzou. On Friday, August 14th of 2015, they had 14 hours notice that they were going to be losing their health insurance. They mobilized fast. By Sunday, the university held a forum to discuss the issues. Monday, the graduate students issued their demands. Wednesday, they walked out. By Friday, their rights were restored along with promises of more. I don't recommend doing this all the time because people will take your message less seriously. But this is how you leverage a crisis. If I remember the exact name of the presentation that Christopherson gave the weekend I met him. And finally, government. That's why we're here. As has been mentioned a few times, we defeated the grad tax back in 2017. This fun thing is the background. We did. We communicated, we talked, we said, this is going to destroy our lives. They're already bad enough. Let's not, shall we? So how to be effective? How can we be effective at our work? I apologize, these are going to be small. To avoid criticism, do nothing, say nothing, be nothing. Because guess what? Not everybody is going to like you. And that's okay. In fact, some people are going to hate and detest you. And it's the very things that some people like most about you that others will find the most repulsive. That is the human condition. You can't please everybody. Don't even try. And I believe this is like the first step when it comes to advocacy, because you're so terrified that people are not going to like what you have to say. And the point is that it's what you need to say. Complain to one who can help you. In all of these examples, you have people who went to people who have power, who can make a difference. They went door to door. They reached out to specific communities. There's some people who, when they protest, they just scream into the void. I hate this. This is terrible. And what are you going to do about it? Are you going to call your legislator? Are you going to draft legislation? Are you going to go door to door? Are you going to work with are you going to sit across the table from somebody who you disagree with completely and try to make a difference and actually maybe make a difference? 9/10 of wisdom is being wise in time. What's happening now matters. When it came to Mizzou, they leveraged that crisis. They'd been advocating for these things for a long time. Didn't happen. They weren't able to get these. I don't even know what all they got as part of that package, but they weren't able to get them until they leveraged that one thing and said, "You want us back in the classroom? This is what you have to do." I already mentioned what happened whenever I visited Mitch McConnell's office last year. Half of being clever is keeping your mouth shut at the right times. Okay? Timing is important. Your best story beats your best data. Every time. Whenever we feel the confirmation dissonance as a thing happens because we feel things in the face of data. The data is saying, this is the truth, and you're going, no, because if that's the truth, then I have to question everything about who I am and what I believe. And I have made so many decisions that who am I to trust now? It puts people into ideological and existential crises. So you can't change somebody's mind with facts alone. They're important, but not alone. You need stories. Think of everything that has happened in this world and all the different ways that people have changed the world through stories. You want to talk about why the arts and humanities are important? This is why. But don't let anybody tell you different. Dr. Morris Grubbs is our assistant dean, and he said, I paraphrase this, that there's a moral imperative to listen to the stories of others. This is not only us listening to others, but also them listening to us. Whenever we're sitting down in somebody's office and we're telling our stories, they feel that this is something important. They have that obligation, and they're likely to listen to you. But it also means you listen to them and understand them better, and not just block it out because it conflicts with your ideology. You have to understand where they're coming from, even if you disagree with it. Think like a wise man, but communicate in the language of the people. We've heard this a little bit the last couple of days. Don't use jargon. The social divide right now is being driven along urban and rural lines. And this elitism that infects universities is a plague. It's destroying communities and communication across the board. You cannot act like you're better than anybody else. We know you don't believe it. Imposter syndrome, we know that that's there, right? So make sure that you accept that and say it's okay. And I need to make sure I respect them as who they are, and that I speak with them, not to them or at them. Words are sacred. They deserve respect. If you get the right ones in the right order, you can nudge the world a little. That's our job. We're going to have little bits of time tomorrow to get the right words in the right order. And it's okay if it's not, but the key thing is to make sure you are talking your truth. And that's going to be hard to mess up. You don't need to be a voice for the voiceless, just pass the mic. Often we have people in positions of power or privilege that want that attention themselves, and they're willing to talk about the plight of those who are marginalized and oppressed, without actually letting those who have had those experiences speak for themselves. But the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. You can speak to your suffering. Let others speak to theirs. That white savior complex is a real thing, and it applies across a lot of different aspects, unfortunately. You cannot antagonize and influence at the same time. When you're talking with somebody, and you're irritated and you're completely out of spoons. If you're not familiar with spoon theory, go Google it later. And you're out of spoons and you're just really tired and frustrated and you just want to lash out. Okay. But just recognize, accept the fact that you are not going to be changing minds. Others might feel inspired and empowered by what you're doing because they can see that. And that's okay. But recognize that the two things are not necessary. Like you're not going to be able to change somebody's mind who you're also antagonizing. Okay? You have to reach across that aisle. Everyone you meet is doing what they believe to be the right thing. No matter what. Otherwise they'd be doing something different. And if you go in there and say you're doing the wrong thing, they're automatically going to be like, I can't work with this person. When you think of Daryl Davis, I mean, he's a black man who is purposely, intentionally making friends with members of the KKK. And what's your excuse? Abraham Lincoln said, I destroy my enemies when I make them my friends. And he literally does. Because he not only destroys his own enemies, he destroys the enemies of everybody that those people would fight against. He is protecting others. There are two kinds of people in this world. Those you love and those you don't know yet. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And all of these examples that we've talked about, they are small groups of people who are making a difference. Sometimes just one person. And they change the world. And finally, life is short. Therefore, I shall be a crusader in the fight against ignorance and fear, beginning with myself. Sometimes the only person you can change is yourself. And that's also okay. Because sometimes a hypocrite is just nothing more than a person in the process of changing. And I strongly hope that everybody here, every day, just tries to be a little bit better. And if you are, you're going to help others be just a little bit better. And that's all we really need. Thank you for coming.